Hey, thanks for joining us for Pact. I am the P, Peter Coffin. The lovely Miss Astronaut Cowboy Doctor, Master of Science is right here. They are the ACD. Don't miss an episode. Subscribe to our new Pact YouTube channel at youtube.com/PactPod, Spotify, or your favorite podcast service. Also, leave us a glowing review on Audible and Apple Podcasts. Help us keep the lights on by becoming a patron at patreon.com/PeterCoffin. Your monthly support gets you into the Discord server, gets you exclusive content, and you see some content before everyone else. We've also got fantastic Pact merch available as well. Finally, please tell your friends. We rely so big on word of mouth. We need many people to be saying. We stream at 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time every Saturday. Thanks a ton for tuning in.
Today we're going to be talking about dunking on trans people to own the libs. And talking about the failures of these internet personalities who either self-identify or adhere to adjacent voices of the post-left. Mm-hmm. The post-left is what I think to be the product of the failures of Western or American leftism, especially in online spaces, in that people see that there are people who are self-identifying as leftists, focusing on things that are very trivial, very unimportant, or focusing on things that are important, but without understanding the material underpinnings of these things. And so with that, there is a significant and increasing group of people who are disillusioned with how ineffective the left has become, and they identify themselves as post-leftists. It's kind of like, leftists are being dumb, so I don't believe in communism anymore, and are disillusioned with whether they're noble causes or not, and a lot of times they are, on the left with how they're being dealt with, and kind of devolve into this doomer, anti-analytical approach to what is happening in the world. And today we're going to be talking about how the development of that market demographic online and politically as a market demographic is feeding into anti-communist sentiments, and it's just another form of anti-communism, despite what some post-leftists might claim. This will all connect together, but we saw a tweet today that was like, okay, well, let's talk about this today, and that this kind of feeds into two sides of the same coin when we're thinking about the post-left. And this Twitter account said, Marx, communism is a society in which the full and free development of every individual forms the ruling principle. Then Kropotkin, who's an anarchist theorist, in an anarcho-communist society, each individual could reach the full development of his faculties, the full development of his individuality. And the point that this anarchist account is trying to make is that, oh, look how similar Marx and Kropotkin are in saying these things. Like, Marxists and anarchists have the same theoretical underpinnings, and it's exactly the same, and like, look how similar this is. Whereas when you actually contrast these two quotes, they're reflecting the exact fundamental difference between a Marxist and anarchist critique, and that Marx takes this collectivist principle and saying that every individual can self-actualize, and that self-actualization contributes to the whole functioning of society. Whereas Kropotkin, and what I think to be is the failure of anarchism as a whole, is focusing on this sort of individual, autonomous, what I would call like individualistic authoritarianism, in which it's not possible for every individual to kind of self-actualize with the full development of each person's individuality is to be the goal, rather than the central contributing parts of a working, functioning, stateless, classless society. So this person is trying to highlight what they believe to be similarities between these theoretical analyses, when it's actually highlighting the crux of the difference.
The real key thing here is the fact that Marx says the full and free development of every individual, which is not talking about individualism or individuality on any level. Whereas Kropotkin says the full development of his individuality. Now, what that exposes is that they care more about like where the individual is, what the individual thinks, et cetera, et cetera.
When you use that analytical approach or lack thereof, you kind of take it a step further and take it a step further and take it a step further until you get to the point where you're arguing with a Marxist, for example. And then you say, okay, well, then what are we supposed to do if this doesn't work once you get to the final analysis?
Mm-hmm.
And then you either revert to liberalism and like all these bread tubers have done to, support these incremental steps that are apparently small victories, even though they're in direct antagonism to resolving the class contradictions that we observe, and you revert to this radical liberalism. Or you become a doomer and you say, yeah, you're right. Nothing works. We can't do anything. We can't just manifest a stateless, classless society tomorrow by focusing on individual freedoms, as Zoe Baker might suggest. So this is all stupid, and communists are stupid, and there's nothing we can do, and the planet is going to explode. The reason that we started out with this tweet is because you have like these two pathways that can emerge, in my opinion, when you take anarchism down to its final analysis of how to attain communistic goals.
Here, the example is anarchism, but really any kind of utopian socialism or utopian thinking will ultimately lead you to this same contradiction. Democratic socialism is an example. The Bernie-crat movement is an example. All this stuff presents tons of contradictions. And everybody's just like, well, that stuff's obviously not true. Again, to bring up Bernie, Medicare for All was kind of a utopian vision in terms of they didn't really have a way of
And then when
passing
we
it.
did, they didn't do it.
Yeah, and then when we had the force the vote thing, all of the Democratic socialists argued how bad that was. Sorry, no, that's not it at all. Whatever. So, if it is about the ideals of the individual in choosing socialism, and if everybody agrees that's what we should do,
Right.
then it will happen. That's the problem.
We're relying on the full development of each person in the entire world's individuality to agree that socialism is the right way. And that's how we'll implement a stateless, classless society tomorrow. So you can understand why some people who might be kind of bordering on a material analysis or thinking, oh, maybe this leftist communism stuff is interesting, sees something like that, realizes that, not in so many words, and sees this utopian understanding of communism, generalizes all leftism and communism in that way. When you take that further and further, what ends up happening is because the post-left has sort of developed its analysis based off of being contrary to whatever leftists or even like radical liberals might say. What ends up happening when your whole analysis is formed on just contradicting those things, you end up spouting, quite frankly, reactionary talking points. The other thing, this kind of Zoe Baker, like ushering into this sort of broader analysis of how we get to where the post-left is, results in people on the post-left saying things like, if you think communism is a solution to anything or in any way desirable, it means you're rich.
Which, I mean, that's a perfect reactionary talking point to fake communists, like thought slime types aligning with the degrowth movement, which is pushed so hard by billionaires. And you have the thought slime saying, I'm anti-capitalist. You have the billionaires saying, I'm anti-capitalist. So the reactionary mind, the one not bothering with material analysis, the one not bothering to try to get to the bottom of what's being said is, oh, these people are talking about socialism or communism, and they're both working in service of the current power structure. That means either they are rich or they're just working in service of people who are rich. So you say, if you think communism is a solution to anything or in any way desirable, it means you're rich. And fair if all you do is look at what thought slime and billionaires say.
And degrowth is something that has been increasingly pushed by billionaires and other really big nonprofit organization, industrial complex contributors. those people are at the top, so they're pushing others to degrowth so that they
Yeah.
could stay there without restructuring the economy in a way that doesn't destroy the planet. Degrowth relies on the fact that consumers, the average working class person, these people just have too much stuff. They need to turn their lights off. They need to stop eating so much. The degrowth movement is in part, or says to be in part, that they rely on individuals consuming too much as something that needs to stop and as something that is going to remediate the climate crisis. But what rad libs might think to be social issues, it also extends to that. So yet another thing that prompted us to talk about the post-left was this recent, was it a TikTok of a white person having surgery conducted because they are transracial.
안녕하세요. 저는 지민입니다. Hey guys, I'm finally Korean. I've transitioned. I'm so happy I've completed my look. I'm finally Korean, guys. I have the eyes. Just had a brow lift as well. So I'm so happy. Finally, I've been trapped in the wrong body for 8 years. And that's the worst feeling in the world, when you're trapped and you don't feel like you can be yourself. But finally, I'm Korean. I can be myself. And I'm so happy.
And because they made their face structure and eyes look different, that in their own mind made them think that they now identify as Korean.
We'll let that one sit for a minute, I think. Just because...
So then you have a lot of people recently on Twitter being like, oh my God, this person and what's her name? Rachel
Dolezal.
These are going to be the downfall of the left and liberals because now we see how like ridiculous being transgender is, because now people are changing races through surgery.
Yeah, transracialism is the skeleton key that will bring down the DNC. If you can switch gender, why not switch race? This is the question that they're trying to actually use to say transracialism and transgenderism are the same thing. Here's the thing. It's not race. Korean is not a race. Korean is a nationality, which depends, yes, on the ideological conception of a nation. However, it also depends on geography. You cannot switch the geography you are from, and nor can you change your biological sex. But that is not what gender is it?
I don't know if you want to say you can't change your biological sex. That gets a little... You can't change the sex that you were assigned at birth.
That's a better way of putting it.
And you can't change the gender that you were assigned at birth. There are a couple things that are important here. Just because something is socially constructed, one, that doesn't mean that it's not real and rooted in material reality. Social construction does not mean a myth. And two, social construction works in different ways with different identities and with different phenomena in general. For example, the way that we conceptualize race globally varies. It's kind of interesting how we do it in the United States. The reason that those groups have been constructed is, one, because of shared historical experiences and even shared experiences related to ethnicity and nationality, shared historical experiences in that way. But also just in terms of like human development over the past, 250,000 years? Mm-hmm. Based off of where people were located and migration patterns. A more like biologically accurate way to think of that would be inclines. And that kind of describes geographically the locations of where people are, how different phenotypic characteristics developed from that, despite, this high genetic variability between races as compared to within. So there is a historical basis that underpins the racial categories that we've socially constructed. That doesn't mean that there are inherent genetic hard line differences between a Black person and a white person. It does mean that there are migration patterns that have informed how we construct race today and how culture, shared historical experience, and even nationality, ethnicity, and things like that intersect with that to make race a social construct that is completely unique from that of gender. So you might have a TERF or like a gender critical person argue that like, well, like women have shared experiences. That's not in the same way when we're talking about clines, when we're talking about migration patterns, when we're talking about culture. The things that women have experienced that are shared are related to social imposition of roles completely. So when we think about being transgender, being transracial, we're talking about two completely different things. One that is materially possible and one that isn't. I want to make very clear, this is not a genetic race essentialist argument at all.
It's actually quite the opposite.
It's quite the opposite. And again, I know I cited this last time. Please fucking read How Race Becomes Biology, the Embodiment of Social Inequality. And it talks a little bit about clines and shit like that. But it has three main assertions. One is that race is not a myth. Two is that social construction doesn't mean something isn't real. And then there's a third thing. Biology doesn't equal genetics necessarily. Biology can be differences that are accumulated over time based off of social inequalities. But yeah, this paper by Clarence Gravely is really good, and it explains, the social construction of race. It doesn't null out of existence the biological differences that exist because of the biological manifestations of social inequalities. And it's a much more sophisticated argument. And he's trying to push the argument that most anthropologists make when they just kind of say race is socially constructed and then just like end it there. He's trying to take that argument further in a way that materially benefits racial and ethnic minorities, particularly in the United States, but also as an anthropologist globally as a whole.
Like, here's the thing. You can know the culture of Korea. You can know what the language is. You can know what people typically look like there. But you cannot change your history to be from Korea. You can become Korean as in you can become a Korean citizen. Sure.
Yeah, there's a difference between Korean nationality and Korean ethnicity as well. You can't change your ancestry to have experienced these historical experiences, to be emergent from a specific cline, from a specific migratory pattern. You can't do that. In the same way that you can't change what sex you were assigned at birth. But the way that these social constructions operate and are assigned to us in our society are much different across gender and race, again, and that the ones that are relevant to gender in itself, it's entirely socially imposed on you without any historical reality related to your phenotypical characteristics or even like culturally bound history as well. I do think that if somebody is having surgeries to look like a certain race based off of what we just said about within and between racial category variability, might want to investigate within themselves why they are doing that.
But it is also their business.
But it is their business, and I don't give a shit. And that has nothing to do with what we're talking about.
Yeah,
we're not going to call the police on him.
Yeah, exactly. Like, who cares?
Yeah, it should be legal to do that, I guess.
I just don't care at all.
I do think that, like, if any of you are personally considering that, I do think that you should talk to some people about it first, understand why that would make you feel better.
The point is that the post left was...
we've lost our way.
The post left brought up this person with the intention. The point they're trying to make is that if you support transgender identity but refuse transracial identity, it's cognitive dissonance. The point in there is to undermine transgender identity. Because in their minds, discrediting trans people will somehow dismantle the DNC, the liberal hegemony, which is just an insane idea. The idea that proving a certain specific identity is bullshit will bring down the liberal hegemony. Transracialism is the skeleton key that will bring down the DNC. That's so fucking stupid. That is identity politics. It's just simple reactionary identity politics. It's a dumb viewpoint to be coming from, and it will not stop them because, again, the point of identity politics is that they can keep bringing in whatever identity they want at any time to be the stand-in for the type of mechanics that they continually use to distract people from class politics. Which, don't get me wrong, I'm all for some lib owning, as long as you do it using material conditions. That's the problem with liberals. Not that they say annoying things. The problem is that they do everything that they can to obfuscate away from class politics.
And I think some of them are doing that unintentionally.
That's what I was just
I think that many of them are stupid enough to not understand how social construction doesn't mean that every single thing that's socially constructed operates in the exact same way.
Yeah.
And obviously that's pretty likely because the analysis that they've come to is so base and supported by nothing but contradicting people that they don't like.
Yeah. Yes, absolutely.
To the point where they're anti-trans, they're anti-worker. By this fixation on debunking transgender people is anti-worker because this is a group of predominantly working class people. It feeds into the narrative of like being transgender is some like bourgeois luxury. And then where do you go from that? You're contributing nothing in terms of political analysis.
The post-left has ultimately just been this thing where people are trying to say the opposite of whatever they want to lump into communists. Like, the reason why these folks don't want communism is because idiots are calling themselves communists and saying dumb shit, basically.
Yeah. And then that makes them right when they counter things that they agree with, like raising wages or supporting gender identities.
Or in a lot of cases, like you'll see people who, because there's such thing as bourgeois infiltration of unions or even bourgeois setting up of unions where the unions don't actually help any material condition of the workers, because that exists, they're just against unions now.
Yeah.
Unions are bad because there's a certain thing that can happen. So they apply it across the board. And that's exactly what's happening here. It's because there is a utopian vision put forward that is not achieved. It's because people think that communism is getting a free ice cream. It's because people think that Bernie Sanders was for sure going to get the Medicare for all. And as it turns out, it's not possible to get past the Democratic primary because they can legally rearrange the whole thing so you can't win no matter what.
It's another reactionary market capitalizing on the anger and disillusionment of people.
Identity politics isn't going to help you. Any specific policy isn't going to help you. It all has to be part of a program.
But again, that materialist program, by virtue of being a class-conscious materialist program, is advocating for the rights of minorities.
Absolutely.
Is advocating for sexual and gender minorities. Is advocating for trans people. Is advocating for all of these socially marginalized identities are championed in a class-conscious analysis by definition of what a class-conscious analysis is, and that we understand how these individuals are differently affected by the materialistic base.
Like we were saying to each other yesterday, like in no way would I ever deny that like black people are not disproportionately affected by police brutality. However, if you ended police brutality as a whole, they would no longer be affected by it. That's the point. That's what you do. That's what communism is, by the way. There isn't a guaranteed endpoint. We can't tell you that we will get to a specific set of like little things. This is what communism looks like. We're going to have co-ops and labor contracts and all this stuff. We can't tell you that's ever going to happen. I can't tell you any of that. I can tell you that the point is to engage in a struggle against class society with the intention of resolving the contradictions of it.
Also, the disillusionment with the utopian thinking that people on the post-left have, they're doing the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
In that they are anticipating some kind of like realistic, specific framework that is put forward outside of scientific socialism and anticipating that that's possible. And when they realize it's not, that's when they go into this doomer reactionary shit.
100%.
And it's because they are subject to the utopian thinking as well.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's because they bought the utopian thinking, and that's what communism was, and it turned out not to be.
Exactly.
That's all for today. Thanks again for watching. This is Pact. I'm Peter. This is Miss Astronaut Cowboy Doctor. To help us out, click like, follow, subscribe, whatever. Leave us 5-star reviews on Apple Podcasts and Audible. To support us, become a patron at patreon.com/PeterCoffin. Thanks so much, guys. We'll see you later.